The sharp, sickening crack of fiberglass snapping echoed louder than the midday traffic on Oak Ridge Avenue. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers as the white mobility cane splintered into jagged halves, kicked violently to the concrete by a man in a police uniform. On the ground, kneeling on the harsh pavement, was a 68-year-old blind woman, her hands desperately searching for the lifeline that had just been destroyed. Officer Brandon Jennett stood over her, his hand resting smugly on his utility belt, completely oblivious to the cell phone cameras recording his every move. He thought he was just putting another helpless citizen in her place. He had absolutely no clue that the woman he had just publicly humiliated was the mother of the newly appointed city police commissioner. Martha Holloway did not let the darkness dictate her life. At 68, having lost her sight entirely a decade ago to advanced macular degeneration, she had mapped out her world through sound, texture, and memory. She was a retired middle school history teacher, a woman who carried herself with a quiet, unyielding dignity. Her neighborhood, the bustling Oak Ridge district, was a symphony of familiar cues. The rhythmic clanking of the metal grate outside the bakery, the distinct hum of the pedestrian crosswalk signal at 5th and Main, and the smell of roasted beans from the corner cafe. She relied on her custom-made fiberglass cane, a lightweight, highly sensitive tool that acted as an extension of her own nervous system. It was her independence, her eyes, and her safety. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the air was crisp, carrying the sharp chill of late October. Martha was on her way to the local pharmacy to pick up a prescription, moving at a steady, practiced pace. The tip of her cane swept back and forth in a fluid, rhythmic arc, tapping the concrete, reading the braille of the city streets. A few blocks down, Officer Brandon Jennett was pacing the sidewalk in a foul mood. Jennett was an 8-year veteran of the force, a man whose career was defined by mediocrity, a staggering lack of empathy, and a thick file of civilian complaints that the Union had always managed to quietly bury. He was a broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl, resentful of a world he felt owed him respect he had never earned. He had recently been passed over for a promotion to sergeant again, and he was looking for an excuse, any excuse, to exert authority and remind someone, anyone, that he was in charge. His partner, Officer Tobias Brooks, a rookie fresh out of the academy, was trailing a few steps behind, already learning to keep his mouth shut when Jennett was on a tear. The intersection of Oak Ridge and 5th was crowded. Martha approached the corner, listening for the automated voice that announced the walk signal. When it chimed, she stepped off the curb, her cane sweeping the crosswalk. She was halfway across when a delivery truck, running a red light, screeched to a halt just inches from the pedestrian zone, blasting its horn. The sudden, deafening noise disoriented Martha. She startled, her internal map momentarily scrambling, and she veered slightly to her left, stepping out of the crosswalk and onto the adjacent sidewalk. She didn't know that she was stepping directly into the path of Officer Jennett. Jennett wasn't paying attention. He was aggressively texting on his personal phone, his head down. Martha's sweeping cane tapped against his heavy black tactical boot. A second later, Martha's shoulder bumped into his arm. It was a minor collision, the kind that happens 100 times a day in any busy city. But for Brandon Jennett, it was an ignition switch. "Hey, watch where the hell you're going," Jennett barked, shoving his phone into his pocket and taking an aggressive step forward. Martha immediately stopped, her face flushing with the sudden adrenaline of the confrontation. She gripped her cane tighter, instinctively pulling it closer to her body. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her voice calm but slightly shaken by the truck's horn and the collision. "I lost my bearings for a moment. I'm blind. I apologize." Jennett looked at her. He saw an elderly black woman in a modest wool coat, holding a white cane. He saw vulnerability, and in his twisted, prejudiced mind, he saw a target. He had spent his entire career profiling, bullying, and escalating situations with minorities in this very district, operating under the assumption that they had no power to fight back. "You're blind? Is that your excuse for assaulting a police officer?" Jennett sneered, his voice rising, designed to draw a crowd, to create a spectacle where he was the alpha. Martha's eyebrows furrowed. She recognized the tone of authority, the heavy boots shifting on the pavement, the distinct crackle of a police radio. "Officer, I assure you, it was an accident. The truck horn startled me. I didn't mean to bump into you." "Accident? My ass. I saw you aim for me. You people think you own the damn sidewalks," Janet spat, closing the distance between them. The dog-whistle racism in his words was thinly veiled, dripping with contempt. "You think holding a little white stick gives you a free pass to disrespect law enforcement?" Officer Brooks stepped up, looking nervous. "Brad. Hey, man. She's visually impaired. It's fine. Let's just keep walking." "Shut up, Brooks," Janet snapped, not breaking his glare from Martha. "I'm tired of these people thinking the rules don't apply to them. Give me your ID, lady. Now." Martha stood tall. She had dealt with bullies in her classroom for 30 years, and she recognized the fragile ego of a man desperate for control. "Officer, I have done nothing wrong. I apologized for bumping into you. I am simply trying to walk to the pharmacy. I gave you a lawful order," Janet roared, stepping so close Martha could smell the stale coffee and peppermint gum on his breath. "Failure to identify is an arrestable offense. You want to go to jail today?" By now, a crowd was beginning to form outside the corner cafe. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks. A young barista named Chloe Fisher pushed open the glass door of the coffee shop, holding a towel, her eyes wide as she watched the heavy-set cop cornering the elderly blind woman. Cell phones began to slip out of pockets, camera lenses pointing toward the confrontation. "Officer," Martha said, keeping her voice incredibly steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "My ID is in my purse, but I am not reaching for it while you are screaming at me. I feel threatened." "You feel threatened?" Janet let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You just assaulted me, and you're the victim?" Typical. Without warning, Janet reached out and grabbed Martha's right arm, his thick fingers digging painfully through the fabric of her wool coat. Martha gasped, trying to pull away from the sudden, jarring physical contact. "Let go of me. You are hurting me. Stop resisting," Janet yelled the phrase automatically, a practiced mantra used to justify his violence. In her panic, Martha's left hand, which held her cane, flailed slightly as she tried to balance herself. The shaft of the cane brushed against Janet's leg. It was the excuse he was waiting for. "She's using a weapon," Janet shouted to his partner, though Brooks was standing completely still, horrified. Janet violently twisted Martha's arm behind her back, forcing the 68-year-old woman to her knees on the hard concrete. Pain shot through Martha's shoulder and knees, but she bit her lip, refusing to cry out. The cane clattered to the ground, rolling a few inches away. "Hey, leave her alone!" Chloe, the barista, yelled from the edge of the crowd. "She's blind, you psycho. Back off. Police business," Janet roared at the crowd, pointing a finger at them. "Anyone steps closer goes to jail for interfering." Janet looked down at Martha, who was kneeling on the pavement, breathing heavily but maintaining an eerie, dignified composure. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. Her silent resilience infuriated him more than screams would have. He wanted her broken. He wanted her submissive. Janet lifted his heavy tactical boot and stomped down on the center of Martha's custom fiberglass cane. Crack. The sound was sharp and final. The cane, which had been Martha's trusted guide through the darkness for years, shattered into two useless, splintered pieces. A collective gasp of horror and disgust erupted from the growing crowd. Several people shouted obscenities at Janet. Officer Brooks looked visibly sick, taking a half-step backward, completely paralyzed by the gross abuse of power happening right in front of him. Martha heard the snap. She knew instantly what it was. A tear finally escaped her unseeing eyes, tracing a warm line down her cheek. Not from physical pain, but from the profound violation of her independence. "Oops," Janet mocked, leaning down close to her ear. "Guess you'll have to find another way to assault cops. Hands behind your back." He yanked her arms together and slapped heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists, clicking them tight enough to pinch her skin. He hauled her roughly to her feet. "You don't know what you've just done," Martha said softly. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was chillingly calm, carrying the weight of a storm gathering just over the horizon. Janet laughed. a dismissive, arrogant sound. "I know exactly what I did. I took a hazard off the streets. Let's go, Grandma." He frog-marched her toward the squad car parked halfway down the block. The crowd hurled insults, a few brave souls demanding his badge number. Janet merely grinned, reveling in the infamy. He felt untouchable. The Union would protect him. His captain would look the other way, and this old woman would plead out to a disorderly conduct charge just to make it go away. That was how the system worked. That was how it always worked. He shoved Martha into the cramped back seat of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat offered no comfort, and with her hands cuffed behind her, she was forced to sit at an agonizing, awkward angle. Janet slammed the door shut and walked around to the driver's side. Brooks got into the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Brad." "What the hell was that?" Brooks finally whispered as Janet started the engine. "She's an old lady. She's blind. We're going to get crucified for this." "Relax, rookie," Janet sneered, pulling the cruiser away from the curb. "She bumped me." She resisted. The stick was a weapon. It's by the book. These people need to learn respect. I don't care if she's blind, deaf, or dumb. On my streets, you comply. Martha sat in the darkness of the back seat. She focused on her breathing, inhaling deeply through her nose, exhaling through her mouth. The humiliation was a bitter pill, the loss of her cane a sharp anxiety, but beneath it all, a quiet, powerful resolve was solidifying. Janet thought she was a nobody. He thought he had complete control. He was so deeply, disastrously wrong. The 42nd Precinct was a notoriously gritty station house, housed in a brutalist concrete building that smelled perpetually of ammonia, stale sweat, and cheap coffee. It was a place where careers went to stagnate, filled with officers who had either given up on climbing the ranks or had screwed up just enough to be exiled but not enough to be fired. Janet hauled Martha out of the cruiser and led her into the bustling precinct. He paraded her through the bullpen like a trophy, ignoring the confused and concerned looks from a few of his colleagues. Bringing in a hardened criminal was one thing. Dragging in an elderly blind woman in a wool coat was another. "Got a live one here," Janet announced loudly to the room at large. Assault on an officer, resisting arrest, failure to identify. Desk Sergeant Miller, a 20-year veteran with tired eyes and a graying mustache, looked up from his computer. He frowned as he took in the sight of the woman. "Janet. What is this? Who is she?" "Just another street terror, Sarge," Janet said, pushing Martha toward the booking desk. "Refused to give me her ID after she tried to run me over." Sergeant Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. He hated dealing with Janet. "Ma'am, do you have identification on you?" "It is in my purse," Martha said, her voice clear and carrying across the suddenly quiet bullpen. "Which your officer confiscated when he illegally arrested me and destroyed my mobility cane." Miller shot a sharp look at Janet. "You broke her cane?" "It broke during the scuffle, Sarge," Janet lied smoothly. She was swinging it. Miller clearly didn't believe him, but he didn't have the energy to fight Janet right now. He reached for the purse Janet had tossed on the counter and opened it. Pulling out a slim leather wallet, he flipped it open and slid out the driver's license, which was marked clearly with a visual impairment restriction. He read the name, Martha Holloway. A subtle shift happened in Sergeant Miller's brain. The name clicked into a slot. It was a common enough last name, but in the context of the city's political and law enforcement landscape, it carried weight. He looked at the address. It was in the upscale part of the Oak Ridge district. "Martha Holloway?" Miller muttered, his eyes darting from the card to the dignified woman standing before him. "That is correct," Martha said. "I would like my phone call, please, and I would like these handcuffs removed. I am not a flight risk, nor am I a danger to anyone." "Book her, Sarge," Janet demanded impatiently. "Put her in holding cell 3. Let her cool off." Miller hesitated. "Janet, take the cuffs off her. She's 68. "I said, she's a flight risk. Take the damn cuffs off, Brandon, or I'll do it myself and write you up for insubordination." Miller barked, his voice cracking like a whip. Janet scowled, his face turning red. He grabbed Martha roughly and unlocked the cuffs, muttering under his breath. Martha rubbed her wrists, feeling the deep indentations in her skin. "Ma'am, you can use the phone at the end of the desk," Miller said, his tone shifting to something much more cautious. "Thank you, Sergeant," Martha said politely. She stepped to the phone, her hands trailing along the edge of the desk to guide her. She picked up the receiver and punched in a number she knew by heart. She didn't need to look at a screen. As she dialed, Janet leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Who you calling, Grandma? Your lawyer? Tell him to bring bail money. Assaulting a cop ain't cheap." Martha ignored him. The phone rang twice. On the other side of the city, sitting at a massive mahogany desk in a sprawling, glass-walled office overlooking the skyline, Adrian Holloway was reviewing a stack of internal affairs reports. At 42, Adrian was a force of nature. He was brilliant, ruthless when it came to corruption, and deeply committed to reforming a police department that had been plagued by scandals for decades. Just 2 weeks ago, the mayor had sworn him in as the new city police commissioner, giving him absolute, unilateral authority over every uniformed officer in the city. His private cell phone buzzed. It was a dedicated line, only given to his wife and his mother. Adrian picked it up immediately. "Mom, is everything okay?" "It's the middle of the day, Adrian," Martha said. Her voice, which had been so strong and steady, finally wavered just a fraction upon hearing her son's voice. The dam of her composure cracked, just slightly. "I need your help." Adrian sat bolt upright, his pen dropping onto the desk. The tone of her voice sent a spike of ice through his veins. "Mom, what's wrong? Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I am currently at the 42nd precinct," Martha said, speaking clearly so the officers around her could hear. "I have been arrested." Adrian blinked, processing the impossible sentence. "Arrested? You? Mom, what happened?" "An officer. Officer Brandon Jennett," she said, reciting the name she had heard the other officer use. "He arrested me for assault. He threw me to the ground, Adrian. He put me in handcuffs." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And he broke my cane. He stomped on it." Silence stretched over the line. For 5 agonizing seconds, Adrian Holloway didn't say a word. The silence wasn't born of confusion. It was born of a rage so total, so absolute, that it required every ounce of his discipline to contain. When he finally spoke, his voice was deathly quiet. It was the voice of a man about to scorch the earth. "Mom, put the desk sergeant on the phone." The silence on the line was heavier than a physical blow. Desk Sergeant Miller watched the elderly woman hold the receiver out toward him, her sightless eyes fixed straight ahead with a terrifying, serene composure. The bullpen of the 42nd precinct was still buzzing with the usual mid-afternoon chaos, phones ringing, officers loudly trading stories over terrible coffee, the metallic clatter of the holding cell doors, but for Miller, the sound was slowly fading into a tight, muffled hum. "Sergeant," Martha Holloway said gently, though the underlying steel in her voice was unmistakable. "My son would like to speak with you." Miller swallowed hard. He reached across the high wooden desk and took the receiver. "This is Sergeant Miller. Who am I speaking to?" "Sergeant Miller." The voice on the other end was preternaturally calm, smooth, and chillingly authoritative. It did not sound like a panicked civilian. It sounded like a predator assessing a wounded animal. "This is Adrian Holloway. I understand my mother, Martha Holloway, is currently in your custody." Miller hesitated, glancing at Jennett, who was leaning against a filing cabinet a few feet away, bragging to another officer about how he had handled a volatile street situation. "That is correct, Mr. Holloway," Miller said cautiously. "She was brought in by Officer Jennett on charges of assault on an officer, resisting arrest, and failure to identify." "I see," Adrian replied, the icy calm never wavering. "And what is the status of her mobility cane?" Miller closed his eyes for a brief second. A cold sweat was beginning to form at the base of his neck. It appears to be broken, sir." The arresting officer stated it occurred during a scuffle. "A scuffle," Adrian repeated. The word sounded dirty in his mouth. Sergeant Miller, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am leaving my office right now. I will be at the 42nd Precinct in exactly 15 minutes. Until I arrive, you are to ensure my mother is seated in a comfortable chair by your desk. She is not to be placed in a holding cell. She is not to be handcuffed. She is not to be questioned or harassed by anyone, most especially Officer Brandon Jennett. Do you understand my instructions? Sir, with all due respect, I run this desk, and standard procedure dictates. Sergeant, Adrian interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the unmistakable weight of command. Do not quote standard procedure to me. If a single hair on her head is out of place when I walk through those doors, I will personally see to it that you are walking a beat in the sanitation district until the day you retire. Am I clear? Miller's spine stiffened instinctively. He had been a cop for 20 years. He knew the sound of real brass when he heard it, even over the phone. But the name Adrian Holloway hadn't fully connected in his panicked brain yet. Clear. She will remain at the desk. One more thing, Sergeant, Adrian added. The trap setting its first spring. Do not inform Officer Jennett or anyone else who I am or that I am coming. Let him bask in his work. I want to see this precinct operating exactly as it is. The line went dead. Miller slowly placed the receiver back on the cradle. He looked at Martha, who was standing quietly, her hands folded neatly in front of her wool coat. Ma'am? Mr. Holloway said he's on his way. Why don't you have a seat right here on this bench? He gestured to a wooden bench inside the main desk partition, a place usually reserved for attorneys or VIPs, safely away from the holding cells. Thank you, Sergeant, Martha said, navigating carefully to the bench and sitting down. Jennett, noticing the exchange, sauntered over, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. He had a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. What's the deal, Sarge? Her lawyer on the way? Tell him he's going to need to work miracles. We got her dead to rights. Miller looked at Jennett, a deep, gnawing sense of dread pooling in his stomach. Jennett was a liability. Everyone knew it. He was aggressive, lazy, and had a nasty streak that the union somehow kept sweeping under the rug. But looking at the blind woman sitting quietly on the bench and remembering the absolute zero-degree tone of the man on the phone, Miller felt a sudden, terrifying certainty that Jennett had finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. It was her son, Miller grunted, returning to his paperwork, trying to avoid Jennett's gaze. He's coming down. Jennett let out a barking laugh. Her son? What's he going to do? Cried the captain. Let him come. I love breaking the bad news to these entitled families. I'll make sure to give him the full breakdown of how his mommy tried to take a swing at a uniformed officer. Across town, the heavy oak doors of the commissioner's office burst open. Adrian Holloway strode out, his face a mask of sculpted granite. He bypassed his executive assistant and walked straight into the bullpen of the Internal Affairs Bureau, located on the secure 5th floor of police headquarters. Detective Vasquez, Adrian barked, not breaking his stride. Maria Vasquez, a sharp, relentlessly thorough IA investigator with a reputation for tearing corrupt cops apart on the stand, snapped to attention. Yes? Commissioner, grab your kit. We're taking a ride to the 42nd. Adrian grabbed his long, dark wool overcoat from the rack. And call dispatch. I want the GPS and body cam telemetry for a patrol unit. Officer Brandon Jennett. I want to know exactly where he was 20 minutes ago, and I want his body cam footage locked and downloaded to our secure servers before we hit the ground floor. Do not go through the precinct, Captain. Pull it straight from the cloud. Vasquez's eyes widened slightly at the direct order, but she didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Is there a specific incident number? No, Adrian said, his jaw locked so tight it ached. He just arrested my mother. Vasquez stopped dead in her tracks for a fraction of a second, the color draining from her face. She looked at the commissioner, seeing the terrifying, restrained fury in his eyes. Without another word, she grabbed her tablet, her badge, and her coat. She knew the 42nd precinct. She knew Jennett File. It was a powder keg. And the commissioner had just lit the match. The ride to the 42nd precinct was completed in agonizing silence. Adrian sat in the back of the unmarked black SUV, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. He had spent his entire career fighting to build a police force that protected the vulnerable, a force built on integrity and community trust. To have his own mother, a blind, elderly woman who had dedicated her life to teaching the city's children, brutalized by one of the men wearing the uniform he commanded. It was a profound, sickening betrayal. "Commissioner," Vasquez said quietly from the front seat, tapping her tablet. "I have the body cam telemetry. The incident occurred at the corner of Oak Ridge and 5th. I've locked the footage on the main server." "But sir," Janet turned his camera off 3 minutes after the arrest. Right after he put her in the cruiser, Adrian's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in the dark. "Of course he did. He's hiding the transport. What about the arrest itself?" "It's there," Vasquez said, her voice tight. "I haven't reviewed it yet, but the file size indicates a struggle." "Don't review it yet," Adrian commanded. "I want him to tell me exactly what happened first. I want his lies on the record." When the black SUV pulled up to the curb outside the brutalist concrete structure of the 42nd Precinct, Adrian didn't wait for his driver to open the door. He stepped out into the crisp October air, buttoning his coat. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He wore a sharp, charcoal gray tailored suit. To the untrained eye, he looked like a high-powered defense attorney or a wealthy businessman. "Stay 3 paces back, detective," Adrian instructed Vasquez. "Observe and record. Do not intervene unless I give the signal." "Understood." Adrian walked through the heavy glass doors of the precinct. The smell of ammonia and stale donuts hit him immediately. The bullpen was loud. Officers were laughing at a desk in the corner. A civilian was arguing with a cop near the vending machines. It was chaotic, undisciplined, and sloppy. But Adrian's eyes instantly locked onto the wooden bench beside the high desk. There she was, Martha Holloway, sitting perfectly upright, her hands in her lap. Beside her, resting against the wall, were the 2 jagged, splintered halves of her fiberglass cane. Adrian felt a physical pain in his chest, a tight, suffocating squeeze. He took a deep breath, burying the sun, and summoning the commissioner. He walked toward the desk, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Janet, who was still hovering near the desk, saw the tall, impeccably dressed black man approaching. He sized Adrian up immediately, his lip curling into a familiar, arrogant sneer. He saw the expensive suit and figured this was the son, probably some corporate middle manager who thought his money could buy him out of a criminal charge. "Can I help you, pal?" Janet asked, stepping directly into Adrian's path, intentionally blocking his way to the desk. He hooked his thumbs into his utility belt, puffing out his chest. Adrian stopped. He was 2 inches taller than Janet, and he looked down at the officer with an expression of absolute, terrifying blankness. "I am here for Martha Holloway," Adrian said, his voice quiet, steady, and carrying perfectly over the noise of the room. Martha's head snapped toward the sound of his voice. "Adrian, I'm here, Mom. Are you hurt?" Adrian asked, his eyes never leaving Janet's face. "I have bruises on my wrists and my shoulder is aching," Martha said clearly. "But I am all right," Janet scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Oh, give me a break." She bumped her shoulder when she was resisting arrest. "Look, Mr. Holloway, or whatever your name is, your mother assaulted a police officer. She refused a lawful order, and she used her little stick there as a weapon. You can bring all the expensive lawyers you want, but she's going to central booking." Adrian didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stared at Janet, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Officer." Adrian leaned forward slightly, reading the nameplate on the man's chest. "Janet. Brandon Janet. Badge number 8842. "That's right," Janet said, stepping closer, trying to use his bulk to intimidate. "You got a problem with my name, pal?" "I have a problem," Adrian said softly, "with a coward who assaults an elderly, blind woman and then lies about it." The word coward dropped into the busy bullpen like a live grenade. The low hum of conversation at the nearby desks sputtered and died. A few officers turned around in their chairs, eyes wide, waiting for the explosion. You didn't walk into a precinct and call an 8-year veteran a coward to his face, unless you had a death wish or a badge heavier than his. Janet's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his collar. He dropped his hands from his belt, his fists clenching. "What did you just call me, you arrogant piece of—" "Officer Janet." Sergeant Miller barked from behind the desk, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward and slammed into a filing cabinet. He could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting, pulling tight like a piano wire about to snap. He didn't know exactly who Adrian Holloway was, but the man radiated a dark, immovable authority that terrified the seasoned sergeant. "Stand down. Let him speak to his mother." "Like hell I will," Janet spat, ignoring his superior. He took another aggressive step toward Adrian, closing the gap until they were mere inches apart. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at Adrian's chest. "You listen to me, suit. I am the law in this district. Your mother attacked me. She swung that cane at my head. I had to use necessary force to subdue a violent suspect. Now, you can step back, shut your mouth, and wait for her arraignment, or I can lock you up right next to her for interfering with police business. Take your pick." Adrian looked at the finger pointing at his chest. Then, slowly, he raised his eyes to meet Janet's furious glare. "You used necessary force?" Adrian repeated, his voice deceptively mild. "Against a 68-year-old blind woman, weighing 130 pounds, a woman who, according to you, managed to assault you, an armed and trained police officer, in broad daylight on a crowded sidewalk. She was non-compliant," Janet yelled, playing to the room now, trying to rally the blue wall of silence. "She was a threat." "I see," Adrian said smoothly. He took a single, deliberate step to the side, bypassing Janet entirely, and walked over to the wooden bench. He knelt down gracefully, the expensive fabric of his trousers pulling taut, and placed his hands gently over his mother's bruised wrists. He examined the dark, purple rings left by the over-tightened steel. His jaw muscles feathered. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time, betraying the hurricane of emotion beneath his stoic exterior. "It's not your fault, Adrian," Martha replied, her chin held high. "He is a cruel man. He needs to be stopped before he hurts someone who doesn't have you to call." Adrian stood back up, his eyes hardening as he turned back to the room. He looked past Janet, directly at the young, pale officer standing near the water cooler. "You. What's your name?" Officer Tobias Brooks flinched, almost dropping his paper cup. "Me? Officer Brooks, sir." "Officer Brooks," Adrian said, his voice ringing out clearly. "Were you present during the arrest of Martha Holloway?" Brooks looked frantically at Janet, who shot him a murderous glare. Brooks swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Yes, sir. I was his partner today." "Did Martha Holloway strike Officer Janet with her cane?" Adrian demanded, the cadence of his voice shifting from a concerned son to an interrogator. "Don't say a damn word, Brooks," Janet roared, turning on his partner. "You don't answer to this civilian. Actually, Officer Janet." "He does," Adrian said. The quietness was gone. His voice now boomed through the concrete room, bouncing off the walls with an authority that commanded absolute silence. Adrian slowly reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal wool coat. Janet instinctively dropped his hand to his service weapon, a deeply ingrained, aggressive reflex. But Adrian didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a sleek, black leather wallet. With a flick of his wrist, he let it fall open, revealing a gleaming, gold shield with an eagle perched on top. The highest-ranking badge in the city. "I am Adrian Holloway," he stated, the words falling like anvil strikes in the dead-silent room. "I am the newly appointed police commissioner of this city, and you, Officer Janet, are about to have the worst day of your miserable life." The silence in the 42nd precinct was absolute. It was a suffocating, physical weight. Phones rang on desks, but no one moved to answer them. The officers who had been laughing moments before were frozen in place, the blood draining from their faces. Desk Sergeant Miller collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Holloway. How could he have been so stupid? The new commissioner had been all over the news for the past 2 weeks, promising a ruthless crackdown on precinct-level corruption and excessive force. And Jennett had just dragged his blind mother in handcuffs. Jennett stood paralyzed. The smug, aggressive posture melted away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled from the water. He stared at the gold shield, then up at the man holding it. The tailored suit didn't look like a defense attorney anymore. It looked like an executioner's robes. "Commissioner," Jennett finally choked out, his voice a pathetic, reedy squeak. I didn't know. Sir, I swear, I didn't know who she was. That is exactly the problem," Adrian said, his voice dripping with venom. He took a step toward Jennett, and this time, Jennett stumbled backward, his bravado entirely shattered. "You didn't know who she was. You thought she was a nobody. You thought she was just another citizen you could bully, humiliate, and brutalize without consequence because you wear a badge. You thought you were untouchable." Adrian turned to the young rookie. "Officer Brooks, I will ask you one more time, and understand that your entire career and your freedom depends on the next words out of your mouth. Did my mother assault him?" Brooks was shaking visibly. He looked at Jennett, a man who had terrorized the streets and bullied younger officers for years. Then he looked at the commissioner. "No, sir," Brooks whispered, tears welling in his eyes. She just bumped into him. She didn't know he was there. He grabbed her, sir. He threw her down. And then, Brooks pointed a trembling finger at the splintered fiberglass against the wall. He stomped on her cane on purpose. "Sir, I tried to tell him to stop. I'm so sorry." "You rat!" Jennett screamed, desperation twisting his features into something feral. "He's lying. Commissioner, he's a rookie. He doesn't know what he's talking about. She was resisting." Jennett pointed a finger at Adrian, panic completely overriding his common sense. "You can't do this. This is a conflict of interest. I'm calling my union rep, Gregory Davies. Davies will have your head for this. You can't investigate an arrest involving your own family." Adrian didn't flinch. A dark, terrifying smile touched the corners of his mouth. "You're absolutely right, Officer Jennett. It is a conflict of interest. That is why I am not investigating you." Adrian raised his hand and snapped his fingers. From the shadows near the entrance, Detective Maria Vasquez stepped forward. She unbuttoned her coat, revealing the bright gold Internal Affairs Bureau badge clipped to her belt. "Detective Maria Vasquez, Internal Affairs, Special Investigations Unit," she announced, her voice crisp and professional. She walked directly toward Jennett, pulling a folded document from her pocket. Jennett backed away, hitting the edge of a desk. "IA? You brought IA? You can't just ambush me. I demand my union rep. I have rights." "You have no proof, just the word of a scared rookie." "We don't need the rookie's word, Jennett," Vasquez said coldly. She held up a tablet screen. "You turned off your body cam during transport, which is a Class A violation of departmental policy. But you forgot one crucial detail about the intersection of Oak Ridge and 5th. Jennett's eyes darted around like a cornered rat. "What? What detail?" "The corner cafe," Vasquez said, tapping the screen to play a video. "They have a high-definition exterior security camera, pointing directly at the crosswalk. We pulled the feed 10 minutes ago." She turned the tablet so Jennett, and the rest of the precinct, could see. The silent footage played in crystal-clear resolution. It showed Martha walking. It showed Jennett texting, not looking where he was going. It showed the minor bump. It showed Jennett grabbing the elderly woman, twisting her arm violently, throwing her to the pavement, and then, with sickening clarity, lifting his heavy boot and stomping on her white cane. "Furthermore," Vasquez continued, swiping to a new screen, "a civilian witness, a barista named Chloe Fisher, recorded the entire incident from a different angle on her smartphone. She uploaded it to social media 20 minutes ago. It currently has 400,000 views. Commissioner. The mayor's office is already calling. Janet stared at the screen, all the blood leaving his face. He looked at the shattered pieces of his life falling around him. The union couldn't save him from this. Gregory Davies wouldn't touch a viral video of a cop assaulting a blind woman, let alone the mother of the police commissioner. He was completely, utterly ruined. Commissioner, please, Janet begged, his voice cracking, raising his hands in surrender. I was having a bad day. I snapped. I need this job. My pension. Adrian Holloway stepped closer, his physical presence looming over the broken cop. You are a disgrace to that uniform. You are a predator who hid behind a badge to terrorize the very people you swore to protect. Your career is over. Adrian turned to Sergeant Miller, who was standing rigidly at attention behind the desk. Sergeant. Officer Jennett is hereby stripped of his police powers, effective immediately. Relieve him of his weapon and his shield. Yes, sir. Miller moved with shocking speed, stepping around the desk and approaching Jennett. Hand it over, Brandon. Now, Jennett, his hands trembling violently, unclipped his service weapon and handed it to the sergeant. Then, he slowly unpinned the silver badge from his chest, the metal clinking against the desk as he dropped it. Detective Vasquez, Adrian commanded. Yes, Commissioner? Officer Brandon Jennett is now a civilian. Arrest him. The charges are aggravated assault, civil rights violations, destruction of property, false arrest, and filing a false police report. Vasquez pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her belt. They clinked together, a sound that echoed through the silent precinct. Brandon Jennett. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. As Jennett was turned around and cuffed the very same cuffs he had used on Martha an hour earlier, biting into his own wrists, Adrian finally turned his back on the man. He walked over to his mother, who had stood up from the bench, listening to the entire exchange with quiet dignity. Adrian gently placed his arm around her shoulders. Let's go home, Mom. I'll get you a new cane tomorrow. Martha leaned into her son's embrace, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Make sure it's carbon fiber this time, Adrian. They're much harder to break. The viral video recorded by Chloe Fisher did not just spark local outrage, it ignited a national firestorm. Within 24 hours, the footage of a uniformed police officer snapping a blind woman's cane and throwing her to the pavement was broadcast on every major news network. The hashtag number Justice for Martha trended globally. For Brandon Jennett, the walls of his reality collapsed with terrifying speed. He spent his first night not in the comfort of his suburban home, but in an isolated holding cell at the county jail, separated from the general population for his own safety. The arrogance that had defined his 8-year career had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. The next morning, the crushing weight of the justice system, a system he had manipulated and weaponized for years, turned its full, unblinking focus onto him. District Attorney Victoria Hayes, a pragmatic and fierce prosecutor who had zero tolerance for police misconduct, announced she would be personally handling the case. She bypassed the standard grand jury process, filing direct, aggressive felony charges, aggravated assault on a vulnerable adult, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and evidence tampering. Jennett placed his one permitted phone call to his union representative, Gregory Davies, fully expecting the usual shield of protection to deploy. Brad, I'm going to be straight with you, Davies said, his voice clipped and distant over the crackling jail phone line. The union is not funding your defense. We are issuing a press statement in an hour condemning your actions. You're radioactive, Brad. You're on your own. The betrayal stung, but the true twist of karma was yet to come. Commissioner Adrian Holloway had promised a thorough investigation, and Detective Maria Vasquez of Internal Affairs was relentless. As Vasquez dug into Jennett arrest records, a dark pattern emerged. She audited his past arrests, specifically focusing on narcotics busts in low-income neighborhoods. Vasquez discovered discrepancies. Large sums of cash logged at crime scenes magically shrank by the time they reached the evidence room. By following a trail of newly opened bank accounts, she uncovered the truth. Janet had been skimming cash from drug dealers for years to fund a severe, hidden gambling addiction. When the embezzlement charges were tacked onto his indictment, the final pillar of Janet life crumbled. His wife, Brenna, horrified by the public humiliation and facing the freezing of their shared assets by the federal authorities, packed her bags, took their dog, and filed for immediate divorce. In less than a week, Brandon Janet lost his badge, his freedom, his union, his marriage, and every dime of his pension. The hunter had become the hunted, caught in a trap of his own arrogant design. Mayor Richard Sterling held a joint press conference with Commissioner Holloway on the steps of City Hall, using the scandal not as a defensive PR spin, but as a mandate. They announced the Holloway Initiative, a sweeping reform package mandating enhanced psychological screenings for all active duty officers, stricter civilian oversight boards, and mandatory, severe penalties for the deactivation of body cameras. Janet had tried to assert his dominance, but instead, he became the catalyst that permanently broke the corrupt culture he thrived in. The trial of Brandon Janet took place 8 months later in the austere, mahogany-paneled courtroom of the Superior Court. The man sitting at the defense table was a ghost of the hulking, intimidating officer who had paced Oak Ridge Avenue. Janet had lost 30 pounds in county lockup. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and his hair had thinned and grayed. He sat with his head bowed, avoiding the eyes of the packed gallery. Officer Tobias Brooks, who had resigned from the force to become a paramedic, took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. He recounted the events of that October afternoon with steady, unwavering clarity, stripping away Janet lies about Martha resisting or acting aggressively. But the defining moment of the trial came when Martha Holloway was called to deliver her victim impact statement before sentencing. She walked into the courtroom guided by her son, Adrian, her steps rhythmic and sure. In her right hand, she held a brand new, sleek, black carbon fiber mobility cane, a custom gift from the mayor's office. She stood at the podium, her sightless eyes facing the direction of the judge, but her words were meant for the broken man at the defense table. "Mr. Janet," Martha began, her voice echoing in the absolute silence of the courtroom. "You looked at me, and you saw a victim. You saw someone whose voice you believed did not matter. When you broke my cane, you did not just break a piece of fiberglass. You attempted to break my dignity. You tried to force me into a world of fear and darkness." Janet squeezed his eyes shut, his hands trembling in his lap. "But you failed," Martha continued, her tone holding no malice, only an unshakable strength. "I have spent my life navigating darkness. It holds no terror for me. The true darkness in this city was the badge you hid behind to terrorize others. You thought you were untouchable. But justice, Mr. Janet, is blind. It does not care about your uniform. It only cares about the truth." Judge Harrison, a stern man with decades on the bench, looked down at Janet with undisguised contempt. "Brandon Janet, you have disgraced your city, your department, and the fundamental concept of law and order," the judge declared, his gavel resting heavily in his hand. "For the charges of aggravated assault, civil rights violations, and public corruption, I sentence you to 12 years in the state penitentiary, with no eligibility for parole for 8 years. May you find the humility in a cell that you so deeply lacked on the streets." The gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot. Bailiff stepped forward, pulling Janet arms behind his back, the same brutal motion he had used on Martha, and secured the heavy steel handcuffs. As he was led away to begin a decade behind bars, Janet looked back one last time. He saw Commissioner Adrian Holloway standing tall beside his mother, an immovable wall of justice. Adrian placed a gentle hand on Martha's shoulder. "Ready to go home, Mom?" Martha smiled, tapping her new carbon fiber cane lightly against the marble floor. It made a sharp, resonant, unbreakable sound. "Yes, Adrian. I believe the path is finally clear." The story of Martha Holloway and Officer Brandon Janet serves as a stark reminder that true power does not reside in a uniform, a weapon, or the ability to intimidate. It resides in quiet, unyielding dignity and the courage to demand accountability. Janet's dramatic downfall and severe criminal sentencing highlight the harsh reality of karma. when systemic corruption is finally dragged into the light of public scrutiny. While dramatic, these narratives reflect real-life struggles for police reform and the crucial importance of community oversight. Ultimately, this story is a testament to the fact that justice, while sometimes delayed, can strike with devastating precision when truth is spoken to power. The shattered cane became the catalyst for a shattered system, proving that the most profound changes often begin with the people society underestimates the most.